Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Monday edition of Point of View. And as you might imagine, next hour we're going to spend some time talking about Afghanistan and a number of other issues in the news. A lot to cover that hour. But this hour, as I mentioned on Friday, is devoted to this new book that is coming out actually tomorrow, Free to Thrive: How Your Hurt, Struggles, and Deepest Longings Can Lead to a Fulfilling Life. It is written by Josh McDowell and Ben Bennett. It is about 200 pages, published by our friends at Thomas Nelson. I think you're really going to appreciate this conversation as we talk about the 7 longings that individuals have and what about unmet longings. But first of all, let me introduce to you 2 individuals we talked with in the past, and that is, of course, Josh McDowell has been with us and has been a member of what was at that time Campus Crusade for Christ, now called Cru, joined in 1961, the Josh McDowell Ministry. And Josh, it is always a delight to have you on the program with us on Point of View.
Well, this is like dying and going to heaven, Kirby.
Let's hope we also can
and you
bring...
you and I have been around a long time.
We have. You know, I might just mention that the foreword to the book is by Dr. Henry Cloud. To show you what a fossil I am, I knew Henry Cloud when he was a student at SMU, so that does go back many decades. But anyway, that shows that we've known each other for a long time. Let me also get Ben Bennett here.
That old.
Yeah, Ben has been with us before. He is the director of Resolution Movement. I want to talk about that in just a minute. And somebody that, Josh, of course, you came in contact with. He's been a staff member there at Josh McDowell's ministry since 2017. And Ben, thank you for joining us as well.
Hey, Kirby, thanks for having me on the show again. It's great to be with you today.
I appreciate you guys. Josh, why don't you start us off here? Because in some respects, you begin the book by reminding people of the difficult, if you will, the difficult emotional situation that you had when you were growing up in a dairy farm in Michigan.
Well, what really got my attention is seeing the number of Christian, I like to call them not leaders, but influencers, taking a nosedive morally. And a lot of pastors that I know. And I thought, what in the world is causing this? And what about me? My gosh, if Robbie Zacharias is vulnerable and others, what about me? And as a result, I started looking into this, and I've got to build some safety factors around my own life and help others to do the same thing, because every time a leader takes a nosedive, an influencer, it affects the body of Christ. I got to tell you, when I heard about Robbie, it took me back. If somebody would have said to me, who's the most least likely person to have this happen to them, I would have said Robbie and myself. And because I have so many security things go around my life. And I can tell you, it floored me. And but I'll tell you this, Robbie had a ministry. Over the years, he affected so many lives. And I make phone calls all over the world because we're in 170 countries. And in the last, 3, 4, 5 months, every country I call, out of Mongolia, Nepal, no matter where, people ask me about Robbie. And that shows the impact that he had. And thank God for that.
Yes. But let me, if I can, Ben, maybe come to you, because what I am picking up from this book, and of course you and I have chatted about this before, is that people have various longings, and sometimes if those longings are not met, they can stumble into different kind of addictions. They can stumble in different ways, like Josh was just talking about. So help us out, because in some respects, people might have heard of Abraham Maslow, may have heard of a few, but you take us through exactly 7 different longings. And I want people, maybe as they're going along, to even get a piece of paper, number 1 to 7, and follow along. But what are those?
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that Josh and I realized after years of, meeting with therapists, doing our own research, looking at neuroscience, looking at what's going on in our day, and then studying the scriptures. And we realized that there are these 7 longings or heart desires that God created every human being with. And those were intended in the Garden of Eden to be fulfilled by God and others, and that leads to a flourishing life. But when they're not met, we can get into that. There's so much harm happens, destruction, addiction, mental health issues, brokenness happens. And one of the things that's fascinating, before I get into the 7 longings, is that, Harvard has been doing this study for decades, looking at what leads to the least amount of disease and the happiest people. And they found that it's good relationships. And when I came across that study, I'm going, this is the Christian worldview. This is what God has been talking about.
Yes.
We have these needs that are meant to be fulfilled by God and others, and that leads to the greatest happiness and flourishing in our lives. And so the first one is the first of the 7 longings, and we explore this much more in depth in the book, but I'll just give an overview of it. The first one is acceptance, and this is to be included, loved, and approved of as you are, no matter what. To be included, loved, and approved of as you are, no matter what. We see this all throughout Scripture, but I think of, Romans 15:7, accept one another, then just as Christ accepted you in order to bring praise to God. That's the beauty of Christianity, is that unlike any other major world religion, other religions say, do good, serve the poor, try and do all these good things, and maybe God will accept you. Christianity says, no, God is righteous and has a holy, perfect standard, and we can never be good enough. But Jesus lived that perfect life for us, died on the cross, rose again. God freely accepts us when we turn from our sin and ask for forgiveness through Jesus. And that is the foundation, that acceptance with God and with other people of so many relationships. The second longing is appreciation, to be thanked or encouraged for what you've done. So this is less about knowing that my being matters, who I am matters. This is about knowing that what I do matters. Even if I didn't do that great of a job, just having encouragement and support from people. Another one is affection, to be cared for with gentle touch or emotional engagement that helps people realize that they're lovable. Next one is access, to have the consistent emotional and physical presence of key figures. That's so many people that I've met throughout life have a father wound, have a mother wound, because their parent may have been there physically, but not emotionally.
Yes.
Another longing is attention, to be known and understood with someone entering your world. I think of King David, or David, I think it was at the time before he was king. He says in Psalm 139, "O Lord, you have examined my heart and know everything about me," and how our God is attentive to our needs, our opinions, our thoughts. He cares deeply about us. And then there's 2 more. Affirmation of feelings. This is to have our feelings affirmed, validated, or confirmed by others. Romans 12:15 says to rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. And then the last one is assurance of safety.
Yes.
To feel safe, protected, and provided for emotionally, physically, and financially.
Well, we'll come back and talk a little bit more about each one of those longings and then what happens when they're unmet. That's the conversation we're going to have right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
The administration wants to get 328 million Americans vaccinated as soon as possible, but there's some obvious roadblocks. Victor Davis Hanson reminds us of the challenge we are talking about when we have an untried vaccine in a multi-ethnic nation. Some minorities are understandably distrustful because of prior government vaccination programs. Nearly 40 million foreign residents in this country come from countries where corrupt governments lost the trust of their population. You could add rural and inner city poor who are not easily reached and much less persuaded. But if this administration wants to understand why some Americans are vaccine hesitant, Hansen says they need merely look in the mirror. Presidential candidate Joe Biden and vice presidential candidate Kamala Harris both expressed doubts about the Trump vaccine, and a mashup of those videos is readily available on the internet. Dr. Anthony Fauci last year dismissed the idea of any viable vaccination in the election year. Pfizer promised a breakthrough vaccination announcement in late October, but then went mysteriously silent until a few days after the election. And President Biden declared on CNN that there had been no vaccinations given until he entered office, yet we have the video of him being vaccinated on December 21st. The establishment media haven't exactly given Americans much confidence. For example, a recent breakout of COVID cases in Provincetown, Massachusetts was reported, but a key fact was omitted. These cases were attributable to the annual gay pride celebrations where some thousands of partiers swarmed bars, clubs, restaurants, and hotels. One reason Americans are hesitant is due to the fact they don't trust the media, drug companies, and the current administration. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
The book is Free to Thrive, and we are privileged to have both the authors, Josh McDowell and Ben Bennett, with us today. And the book is coming out August 17th, which is actually tomorrow, so you should be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we have a link to Josh McDowell's ministry, some other information, so you can get it in hardback or Kindle. But one of the things I thought we might do, Josh, is come to you, because as we go through these longings, people might say, well, how can I then meet some of those needs? And in the section on acceptance, this is so typical Josh McDowell, when your son, Sean, was 12 years of age and playing on the Little League team, you went out and got 12 coupons good for ice cream sundaes at the local restaurant and then handed them to the coach. Well, the coach said, well, that's great. I will give these out after their first win. And you said, no, coach, I want you to give them sundaes after their first loss, because what you were trying to do is help them understand that they were accepted whether they won or lost that Little League game. And there's just a very good concrete way to begin to show your children or your grandchildren this idea of acceptance, isn't it?
It's one of the few ways. If they don't see it and hear it, they won't believe it. Well, let me give you a couple qualifying things to these 7 longings. One, the longings are perpetuated because of the lack of healthy relationships. Now, the healing part to these longings is relationships. And most people don't realize that. It's 2 major relationships: our relationship with God the Father through Christ and our relationship with others in the body of Christ. That's the healing process for these. And the other is that most of our longings have a hurt or problem deeper in your life. For example, when I was 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, my father, a number of times, one I remember very specifically, we were walking out to the barn, and he just casually said, he'd been drinking. You always say something like this when you've been drinking. He said, you know, you were unwanted. We really didn't want you. You're not only good for working the fields. Wow, Kirby, that hit me to the core at 8, 9 years old.
Yes.
And I have not forgotten it to this day. It still rises in the front of my mind. Now, what happened in my life because of that? I became a rescuer. You say, what do you mean? Whenever somebody had a problem or a need, I couldn't say no to it. If someone asked for help, I had to say yes. Because if I said no, then my emotions told me I'm not a loving person. If somebody was hurting and I didn't step in and help the healing process, then I was not a loving person. But then as soon as I would say yes to someone or step in and help, then I became a loving person. And I was able to trace that all the way back to my father.
Wow.
And what was happening in my life, I was tired all the time. I remember so many times on the phone, I would hear Dottie in the background when somebody would call me to do something or help them or they need something. And Dottie would say, say no, say no, say no. I mean, she just repeated it over and over again. But almost every single time I said yes. Why? Because in my mind, of my misunderstanding of love,
Yes.
as long as I said yes to someone, I was a loving person. When I said no, I wasn't. And so when I would say no to someone, deep down inside, I was saying yes. And often when I would say yes to someone, deep down inside, I was actually saying no. Well, why are you so insensitive to me? Can't you see I'm a bit, inside? And when Paul wrote, let your yea be yea and your nay be nay, I had to learn that none of us will be free until our yea on the outside is a yea in the inside. A nay in the inside is a nay in the outside. And that's a process that I had to go through to become free to literally thrive in life.
Ben, let me come to you because we're talking about there the people pleaser. We always have to say yes. But another part of your, if you will, wholeness apologetic is sometimes that brokenness leads to unwanted behaviors. And of course, Josh and I, and of course you and I have talked about everything from pornography to drugs, a variety of others, suicidal depression, all sorts of things. And so that's the other part of that. Sometimes it manifests itself in what looks like very positive behaviors where you always say yes to everything that somebody asks, but many times it surfaces in negative behaviors, doesn't it?
Yeah, Kirby,
yes, so much so.
Yeah, for me growing up, that was...
Let me say this.
Okay, go ahead, Josh. Yep.
Henry Cloud once said to me, he said, Josh, when you rescue a lot of people, you're sinning against them.
Wow.
Man, that hit me like a 2-ton truck. I said, Henry, what do you mean? He said, you are rescuing people from things that they need to work through to become a stronger person. And you're stepping in and rescuing them. And as a result, you're sinning against them because you're keeping them weak and not letting them grow strong. Wow, was that a new whole concept to me. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I was just going to say, for me, growing up, a lot of these longings went unmet. And not only that, but they were outright rejected. I think about acceptance. And for me, oftentimes growing up, I faced my dad's brunt anger. He would get really angry. He would go into almost like a state of rage and punish me. And so I was terrified of him growing up. I remember also being bullied by my friends for my faith in Jesus and the music I listened to. And so I had these deep unmet longings for acceptance, for attention, just wanted to be known and loved and understood. And that led me at an early age to begin responding through anxiety. I was anxious, always looking for the next time I would be rejected. I started to get depressed. I would turn inward and go all bad on myself and agree with the lies that other people were telling me. Eventually, I got addicted to porn and food, and those were ways to kind of escape and experience some pseudo sense of safety or peace for a moment in time. And of course, that led me down a dark road, and eventually suicidal thoughts entered in. I love Jesus with all my heart, but I wondered, why could I not get free no matter how hard I tried? And it was through eventually understanding these unmet longings that all of these, the sin, the struggles I was having, those things weren't random. They were signals that I needed to answer through God and others that actually ended up leading me to a flourishing life. They weren't random behaviors. They were driven by these unmet longings, and through reaching out for help and starting to find these fulfilled by God and others, that's what God slowly used to set me free.
I might just mention we have a section here that we'll talk about a little bit later about joining the resolution movement. But Ben, let me stay with you for just a minute, because you can break these down into two areas. Attacks, we can talk about sexual abuse, physical abuse, bullying, which you've done. But those are the, if you will, the attacks. But sometimes what it is more subtle. It's the absence, the fact that you have an absent father or mother, or feelings of abandonment, even if you weren't abandoned. Maybe the lack of empathy, attention, lack of loving words. So sometimes it can be really overt, easy to identify. How many times over the years on this program will we talked about people that have dealt with sexual abuse? But others may have a brokenness that is a result not so much from an attack, but from an absence. Isn't that fair?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Attacks are these outright critical or abusive or harsh things done to us. It could be critical words or some type of abuse, emotional abuse. But research is also finding that these consistent unmet needs, unmet longings, lack of loving words, your dad not showing up to your biggest football game of the year, that can also lead to severe deficits. And if that's consistent, research is showing that like the critical words or the abandonment can actually impact somebody just as negatively as sexual abuse if it's consistent.
And again, I just wanted to put that on the table, but we need to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about this idea of unmet needs. And of course, also talk about, well, then what can we do, and how, in a sense, we need to come back to seeing ourselves the way God sees us. But if you find yourself during the break wanting to get some more information, first of all, the book is just coming out, so you can pre-order it, although, of course, it's coming out tomorrow. And, of course, we have a connection to josh.org and resolutionmovement.org, as well as the book, which is both in hardback and Kindle. And it is going to be one that I think is going to be very helpful to you and your family, and also for those of you that are Christian leaders in your ministry. So let me encourage you to visit some of those links. They're all at our website, pointofview.net, and we will continue our conversation on the book Free to Thrive right after these important messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Josh McDowell and Ben Bennett, and the book is entitled Free to Thrive. It is published by our friends at Thomas Nelson. You should be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we have links to josh.org as well as a number of other links that you will find very helpful. And Josh, let me come to you because I know that you always want to make this practical, and this book is so good in that regard because you have, first of all, a chart of unmet longings, and people maybe looking through that can say, okay, that hits, but you even have an assessment. Maybe you could take us through how you were even doing your own assessment, maybe with Henry Cloud, because a lot of people wonder, well, how do I kind of get off of square one where I am right now and begin to get some healing?
I think most of us need help to do that. Sometimes just a regular counselor or a professional. For me, I needed a professional counselor. I was running a global ministry, huge ministry, which I am today, 100 and some countries of the world, seeing so many come to Christ. People were looking at me as being spiritually fulfilled and everything, and I was doing well. But there was that nagging doubt in my mind, there's something wrong. And I couldn't put my finger on it. I tried. I knew I had a problem. Second, I knew I couldn't solve it. But third, I wasn't quite sure who could help me. And I'd heard Henry Cloud speak several times. So I thought, I'm going to give it a shot. So I called him and I said, Henry, there's a problem in Camelot, meaning that, my life looks like Camelot, but there's a problem there, Henry, and I don't know what it is. And I said, I need a coach. I didn't say I need a therapist or a coach. I said, I need a coach. Maybe that was because of my pride. I wouldn't say therapist or counselor. And so for a whole year, every time I came home, I traveled up and spent a couple hours with Henry. And what Henry did was just ask me questions and listen to me. Ask me questions about my childhood, everything else, relationship with my dad, with my mom, how I did things, what I thought about things. And then he would open up the scripture and speak right into those needs in my life. And we often need someone else to listen to us, to help us find out what is it that's in our life that we can't put our finger on. Now, sometimes you can do that yourself, but most of the time you need help. And this is where I thank God for professional counselors and therapists and coaches. And what I say to people, if you don't know where to go, there's two places that I recommend people. One, go to the pastor of your church. They usually know good therapists and counselors in the area because they can't do all the counseling and everything, and they need good, solid people to recommend for their own congregation. And I said, second, call the American Association of Christian Counselors, AACC. When I'm trying to find a counselor for somebody, I'll have my secretary call them and say, this is the situation, this is their zip code. Do you have 2 or 3 qualified counselors you'd recommend that deal with these areas? And they would always have 1, 2, or sometimes 3 names. And then we would call and interview them. Is this mainly what you do? Are you very comfortable in this area, et cetera, and everything? And then I recommend one of those 3 to someone. And someone can do that for themselves. But don't try to go it alone. In the American culture, it's individualistic. Be a man, stand up, you can do it, go for it. Well, I'm not sure that's so biblical.
Ben, if I can come to you, because one of the things you do have in that chapter is a depth of longings assessment. Some people might think, well, I'm okay, but if they go through those questions, or you even have a table on coping behavior, and we've talked about just a few of those examples, they might say, okay, now that I'm looking at that depth of longings assessment, or now that I've looked through that table and total it up, I guess maybe I do need a counselor. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. That depth of longings assessment we developed with Dr. Ted Roberts, who's was a pastor for decades, and
Yes.
he's been a therapist for decades and a leading voice. And Josh and I developed that with him and tested it, and it was just phenomenal to see how the accuracy of it. And one of the reasons we did that and the table to help identify these things is because a problem identified is a problem half solved. Yeah, I know in my story and so many people, the hundreds of people I've worked with, they didn't know what was behind their sin and behind their struggles and why they were so anxious or depressed.
Right.
And through identifying those unmet longings, that's when they realized, okay, now here are the steps I can take to invite God and others in. Here's where I need healing. Here's where my mind needs to be renewed. Here's where I need new experiences because I've got all these negative experiences where I've been shamed or lonely or abandoned. And that just really paved the way for them to find healing and freedom.
And so, again, part of it is just acknowledging that a need there is a need. And then can you maybe help us with the next step? Because Josh, of course, talked about his next step. What was your next step?
Yeah, for me, it was realizing that I needed wholeness and healing in three different areas. First was spiritually, and of course that begins with being reconciled to God and having a personal relationship with Him. But I realized how messed up my view of God was. I thought He was angry. I thought He was distant. I thought He turned His face away every time I sinned. I needed to really look through the Scriptures and experience it. And it came through mentors who really modeled that to me, who helped me realize that I was loved, that they weren't going to give up on me. They showed up for me, and those new experiences helped me with God and them, helped renew my view of God, all, based on the Scriptures. The second thing I needed was emotional wholeness. I needed to see myself the way God sees me. I had been wounded. I had been hurt. I had been shamed, told that, I was the problem for years. And I needed to realize what was true of me in Christ and that I was made in the image of God, and to get around people who treated me as loved, as valued, who cared about me. And that bleeds into the last part of the relational wholeness. I needed a life without isolation, without secrets, a life where I could be fully known and fully loved, a life where people would challenge me, encourage me, and help meet those 7 longings in my life, and then I could meet them in their life. So it was a process that I've been in for 10 years, but early on in my process, it was seeking and living those 3 relational categories out and finding the 7 longings fulfilled in my life.
Wow. Josh, one of the things he said was in chapter 7, you got the wrong view of God, also seeing yourself as God sees you. Go ahead.
Where this helped me was a church. I was dating this young lady whose parents were just phenomenal, walked with Christ, lived it out and everything. And I was so hungry for what they had. So I don't want to mention the name of the church because some of these I'll say later, but it's a little church out in the country, no stores around it or anything, miles out nowhere. And the people there were the types of relationships God wanted me to have around my life. And I just kept going back there. And I was in Battle Creek, Michigan. I would drive 40, 45 minutes to get there on Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night as a college student because these people knew how to love someone and to accept them the way they were. Now, my downside was this, and this almost derailed me. They would have Sunday nights. They'd have ice cream outings, things like that at somebody's house. And a lot of adults, kids would show up and everything. And I couldn't believe how these women gossiped. And
wow.
And it really hurt me. And I almost walked away. Isn't that amazing? because I knew back then, if people talk to others about me, they'll talk about me to others.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I hear people gossip, boy, do I back off fast. But I'm so thankful that the quality of the relationships I built brought me through with flying colors. So that's how I became attached to the solution in the healing process, was through a church.
Very good. Let me take a break, and we'll come back. We'll talk a little bit more about this idea of maybe having the wrong view of God and to begin to see yourself as God sees you. It's all part of this excellent book called Free to Thrive. Josh McDowell, Ben Bennett with us. We'll continue our conversation with them right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. The book is entitled Free to Thrive. It is published by Thomas Nelson, written by Josh McDowell and Ben Bennett. And Ben, let me just come to you for a minute, because you were talking about this idea of having a wrong view of God. That really brings us to one of the chapters where you have to see yourself as God sees you. And that is a major hurdle or stumbling block, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. I think, there tends to be like two extremes that we explore in the book. One is that you're worthless. Above all else, the heart is deceitful, which, keep in mind, is Old Covenant before Jesus came and, said that he would give us a new heart, which he has done. So we can have, two different views, that one, and then this view of there's nothing wrong with you. You're a good person. But I think the Bible is more so right there in the middle. We are born with infinite value. We have dignity. We are worthy of love. However, we're born broken and with sin, and we've all violated God's just standards, and we need that forgiveness. But at the same time, we're valuable. And then with Jesus, we're forgiven, we're restored, we've got our identity in Christ. He doesn't love us as a result of the cross. It was because of love that he went to the cross. And so I think it's more so there in the middle. And, for me, growing up, I basically copied and pasted my view of authority onto my view of God. I had negative experiences with my dad, with teachers, with police officers, and so I viewed God the same way. Yes, I read that God was loving, but I also read about God's wrath, and so I couldn't help view God the way I viewed those authority figures, and I thought he treated me the same way. But it was through new experiences with mentors, with friends, and studying the scriptures and seeing what it actually teaches, that I started to have a renewed view of myself and to actually believe that I'm loved, that I'm valued, that I'm redeemed, and here for a purpose.
So, Josh, again, people think they're unloved, unworthy. It does seem to me that a right view of God is really key, isn't it?
Oh, it's the answer. Let me show you in my own life. I always had to work to be accepted. I had to perform. I had to say yes to be accepted, to be loved. And when my pastor pointed out to me, and he went over to this house where I was staying and sat down with me for almost 2 hours on the couch and walked me through scriptures on acceptance. And when I realized that God accepts me just the way I am, just the way I am, with all my blemishes, everything, God accepts me. I'm not what I ought to be, I'm not what I used to be, and I'm not what I'm going to be. But God intends us to enjoy the process of becoming who he created us to be. And this is a phrase, it seems so simple, but it was so profound in my life. If I do not accept myself the way I am, I'm saying that I have a higher view of acceptance than God does. Whoa. And for some people, that may not mean much. Boy, to me, it meant everything.
Yes.
And so that's when I really dug into seeing, how does God accept me? And then remember when Ben mentioned that to satisfy those longings, he turned to eating and to porn. 27% of American adults eat to manage stress in their lives.
Wow.
Whew, that's 1 out of 4. And then, this is mind-boggling, 91.5% of men and 60% of women have viewed porn in the last 30 days. And I think I'd have to say probably eating and porn are two of the biggest ways that people deal with these unmet longings in their life.
Wow.
And the other key thing is so important, Kirby. These longings are maintained and sustained by the lack of healthy relationships. And the only way you sustain healing to it is the abundance of good relationships, starting with God and then others. And you can go to my website, josh.org. Anybody can go there, just josh.org and /7 A's of parenting, or just parenting principles, but 7 A's of parenting. And I give you 7 steps of how to build a relationship with others that will lead to freedom and not bondage.
Let me also mention, if you go to josh.org/thrive, of course, we already have that on our website. If you pre-order the book, Of course, there's also a way to get copies of this, the Resolution video series, and all sorts of others, as well as the fact there's a book trailer, which I think would be great for people to watch. It only takes about 2 minutes. And just before we run out of time, I wanted to not only mention josh.org, but Ben, let me come to you for just a minute, because we also have the link to resolutionmovement.org, which also is a resource that's available. So talk about what people will find when they land on that website as well.
Mm-hmm. So the Resolution Movement is what Josh and I launched because we deeply believe in the next generation. And one of the things we discovered was how deep these unmet longings are for them and their struggles. And, 70% of teens say anxiety and depression are major issues with their friends. So we wanted to be part of the solution. So we launched this movement. On the website, you'll find articles, podcasts, interviews with experts, email series, video series, of course, the link to the new book, Free to Thrive, and then and links to all of our social media. We're on TikTok and Instagram, and it's really amazing to be able to reach people all around the world through TikTok, people reaching out who are struggling, thinking about suicide, and they reach out to us and then share how a video gave them hope. We're seeing people meet Jesus and saved. And oftentimes they're more comfortable reaching out to an account on social media than talking to somebody because they may have shame around what they're feeling or struggling with. So God's doing a lot of great things. You can check it out at resolutionmovement.org.
We also have a place where they can give their email, join the movement, also have you come and speak. We're coming out of the pandemic and lockdown, so there's an opportunity for individuals to schedule either or both of you. So that's another opportunity. And again, the book is coming out, so we wanted you to be the first to know about it. Free to Thrive, Josh McDowell, Ben Bennett, forward by Henry Cloud. 11 chapters. We've covered some of them, but there is so much more, and there's an appendix, other resources, and some assessment that you can do as well. So Josh and Ben, as always, it's great to have you on the program, and look forward to the next opportunity.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. If I told you before, you're one of the best ever to be interviewed. You know what you're doing. You put time into it. You read the book. You knew the questions to ask. And thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you. We're going to take a break. And Ben, thank you for being here, and look forward to seeing you face to face as well, because we certainly appreciate your ministry as well.
That's right, Kirby. Thanks so much. Phenomenal. Great to be with you today, and love what you're doing.
Let me again hold up the book. Those of you watching online, of course, we have great information about that. Go to josh.org, find out more about the Resolution movement, and just so many things that we've posted on the website. They have some great resources as well as some videos. My assignment to you is, of course, to get the book, but also why don't you take some of those resources, some of those video resources, put them on your Twitter account, your Facebook account, something like that. Send it to someone maybe needs to know about this, and let's see if we can create a splash because of this interview today. The book technically comes out tomorrow, but I think if you order it, you'll see it in your box very, very quickly, and go to those ministries and find out more. Okay, we come back. Got a lot to talk about. Afghanistan, the Taliban. Going to try to educate you where we can, and we'll take some phone calls right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
So we're going to get back into some of the issues in the news. And, of course, the biggest issue in the news, of course, is what is happening in Afghanistan. As always, I want to try to give you different perspectives. So we have a piece by Andrew McDowell, who is an individual that I've quoted before, how in some respects the philosophy and the military strategy in Afghanistan was destined to fail. And you could use that as an argument for why we maybe shouldn't have been there in the first place. And there are certainly a number of people that have said that. I also give you a piece by David French, who has been with us both by phone and in studio, when never again becomes again and again. And of course, we have some pictures. I guess I could grab this one and hold it up for the very few of you that may be watching online. You've seen these pictures before, but this is a picture, if you happen to be watching, of a helicopter leaving Saigon in 1975, and then you have a helicopter leaving Kabul just a few days ago, and just the saddest story that has unfolded in Afghanistan. We can have all sorts of debates as to whether or not we should have been there. There is every reason why we might have wanted to go in there to prevent another 9/11 from taking place, because after all, Mullah Omar was allowing Osama bin Laden to stay in Afghanistan. So you could argue that use of force to go in and root out Osama bin Laden was justifiable, but then to stay there for 20 years in the longest war in American history made no sense. And if you are wondering about the timetable, back in April is when President Joe Biden ordered the full withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan by September 11th, 2021. Why September 11th? Well, you know the reason for that. And, of course, making it the longest overseas war in America's history. The mission itself was slated to be over by August 31st, but it really doesn't matter, because the really outnumbered Afghan forces were actually probably unable to resist what was happening from the Taliban fighters. And so as a result, they just moved quickly to take every particular place. And even last night, the U.S. Embassy in Kabul was evacuated. What I want to try to do is maybe give you a couple of statements from different individuals. Originally was going to maybe read some from David French, some from Andrew McDowell, even one that we've posted here in which some people are talking about the fact that it's over. A good piece that even came out with the Wall Street Journal, Biden's Afghan surrender. But I really today found a piece that we have not posted, but I think we're going to try to, that comes from Senator Ben Sasse. Now, Ben Sasse was on with us once when he was a candidate. I have been unable to get him on since then, which I wish we could, because he, I think, plays this down the middle, in which he, on the one hand, recognizes the mistakes made by the Biden administration, but doesn't say that the Trump administration is blameless. Of course, he tends to be a little more critical of Donald Trump than some of the other Republicans. But he said, well, President Joe Biden cowers in Camp David. The Taliban are humiliating America. Senator Ben Sasse says the retreat from Afghanistan is our worst foreign policy disaster in a generation. As the Taliban marches into Kabul, they're murdering civilians, reimposing the vicious Islamic law, and preparing to turn Afghanistan into a bandit regime. The U.S. Embassy has told Americans to shelter in place, which, by the way, is true, which is pretty a sad commentary when you're saying you just need to hide from the Taliban. Refugees are fleeing into the airport, begging to escape the coming bloodbath. None of this had to happen, at least what Senator Ben Sasse says. He says, America is the world's greatest superpower. We ought to act like it. But President Biden and his national security team have failed to protect even the American embassy in Kabul. They have broken America's promises to the men and women who long for freedom, especially those thousands of Afghans who served alongside our military and intelligence services. They are turning their backs on the women and children who are desperate for space in the remaining flights out of hell. Senator Ben Sasse goes on to say, gross incompetence has given the Taliban a terrible opportunity to slaughter our allies. 88,000 of our Afghan allies have applied for visas to get out of the country, but the administration has approved, are you ready for this? 1,200 so far. It's been among the bipartisan group of senators who have pushed Biden to expedite this process, but to no avail. By the way, if I can inject at least a few of my comments, at a time when we're allowing people to cross the southern border at whim, we have individuals that have demonstrated their support for this country with their lives who can't even get out of the country, and you know what's going to happen to those who remain. He says at this point it's not clear how many will be able to get out. Every translator and ally who stood by us is now at risk. Of course they are. The bloodshed wasn't just predictable, it was predicted. For months, Senator Ben Sasse says Republicans and Democrats on the Senate Intelligence Committee have warned the Biden administration that this would happen. Now the administration is acting like this is a surprise. It's shameful, dishonest spin. He goes on to say that the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has been all over cable news pretending this isn't a disaster. Administration apologists can bleat talking points all they want to, but they can't drown out the screams of the women Taliban forces are systematically brutalizing. The administration naively talked about a diplomatic solution. The Taliban was never interested and have broken every agreement they signed. Just look at the recent headlines. He goes through some of those, so I'll continue that as well. He says the Taliban don't care about getting invited to the UN's international cocktail party in Brussels. Bromides about Taliban's role in the international community aren't going to call them off. The Taliban aren't going to stop being the Taliban just because Jen Psaki scolds them. America's retreat is a super and major propaganda coup for the jihadists. The Taliban will claim to be a superpower slayer. The Taliban helped our allies stage the 9/11 attacks almost exactly 20 years ago, and after our retreat, they'll be able to brag about humiliating us again. He says, make no mistake, the Taliban will exploit every image of American retreat. Pictures of desperate Afghans perilously crowded around the unguarded airport in Kabul are painful reminiscence of the images of Saigon, when I just mentioned a minute ago. Images that cemented communist victory in Vietnam and showed America weakness to the world. Jihadists are flocking to the hallowed ground where they have just defeated the infidels. Afghanistan will become a sanctuary for terrorist groups all over again. China and Russia will look to capitalize on Biden's weakness and incompetence too. Their message is simple. Why should Ukraine or Taiwan put any faith in the United States after seeing how Washington has abandoned its allies in Afghanistan? America's enemies are salivating at the thought of taking advantage of the president who surrendered in the war on terror. But then he says, many in my party are trying to blame shift as if the last administration didn't set us on course. Here's the ugly truth. Neither party is serious about foreign policy. For a decade now, Democrats have lied to the American people about our mission in Afghanistan. I'll continue, but this is a piece by Senator Ben Sasse. I think it reminds us that these last two administrations don't really seem to want to fight a war and win it. We'll come back and talk more about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
The administration wants to get 328 million Americans vaccinated as soon as possible, but there's some obvious roadblocks. Victor Davis Hanson reminds us of the challenge we are talking about when we have an untried vaccine in a multi-ethnic nation. Some minorities are understandably distrustful because of prior government vaccination programs. Nearly 40 million foreign residents in this country come from countries where corrupt governments lost the trust of their population. You could add rural and inner-city poor who are not easily reached and much less persuaded. But if this administration wants to understand why some Americans are vaccine hesitant, Hansen says they need merely look in the mirror. Presidential candidate Joe Biden and vice presidential candidate Kamala Harris both expressed doubts about the Trump vaccine, and a mashup of those videos is readily available on the internet. Dr. Anthony Fauci last year dismissed the idea of any viable vaccination in the election year. Pfizer promised a breakthrough vaccination announcement in late October, but then went mysteriously silent until a few days after the election. And President Biden declared on CNN that there had been no vaccinations given until he entered office, yet we have the video of him being vaccinated on December 21st. The establishment media haven't exactly given Americans much confidence. For example, a recent breakout of COVID cases in Provincetown, Massachusetts was reported, but a key fact was omitted. These cases were attributable to the annual gay pride celebrations where some thousands of partiers swarmed bars, clubs, restaurants, and hotels. One reason Americans are hesitant is due to the fact they don't trust the media, drug companies, and the current administration. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I certainly want to depend on some of you that maybe have served in Afghanistan. Of course, we had Heather Mercer on this program years ago, and she's been in a couple of the studios that we've had over the years because she was one of those individuals captured by the Taliban and has had a real outreach to those both in Afghanistan and ultimately in Iraq. But I even saw her post very sad about the fact that if you know these people in Afghanistan, the Taliban is not representative of them, but nevertheless, they're the ones that are going to be in power. And in just a minute, I want to talk about what they believe and what we can expect in the future. But let me come back to this article by Senator Ben Sasse. It's the last article we just have on the website right now, Worse Than Saigon, in which he was talking about, as we left off, just the lies that we've been told. And here he also goes on to say that politicians and pundits who make excuses for this shameful retreat will dishonestly claim that it was either this or fighting so-called forever wars. We've heard this before from the previous administration and the current administration. They pretend that our only choices, he says, were a massive occupation or an immediate withdrawal. They ignore the reality on the ground. Their cheap talking points have led to chaos, persecution, and death. Politicians, he says, don't tell this truth. America didn't have a nation-building occupation in Afghanistan. The last time we had 100,000 troops in the country was a decade ago. We're not waging endless wars in Afghanistan any more than we're waging endless wars in South Korea, Germany, or Japan, or Kosovo, or Honduras, or any number of other nations where we have forward deployed troops. A relatively small number of troops had successfully supported our Afghan allies by providing the backbone for intelligence, special operation missions. Americans weren't building empires or fighting unwinnable battles. We were defending airfields and decapitating terror organizations while keeping a light foot. Americans have heard of some of the high-profile goons, that's his word, Senator Ben Sass uses, such as Qasem Soleimani and Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who, by the way, was the head for a while there in Iraq. But our heroes in Afghanistan have killed a lot more bin Laden wannabes whose names you don't know precisely because we killed them before they could take down a World Trade Center. We fought and won this war in Afghanistan, not on American shores, but you wouldn't realize that from the isolationist rhetoric surrounding Biden's choices. It's important to recognize, he says, the work that our special forces and intelligent operators did after 9/11. The partnership they built with our Afghan allies were premised on the idea that America isn't capable of this kind of betrayal. I've had dozens of conversations with American intelligence officers and special operators over the past few weeks, and they've told me that they swore to their Afghan recruits that if they fought shoulder to shoulder with Americans, we'd protect their wives and children. Those promises are being broken. America is supposed to be better than this. The Biden administration is spitting in the faces of all these heroes, but we owe them a debt of gratitude. The work they did mattered and still matters. Our troops didn't lose this war, Senator Ben Sass says. Politicians chose defeat. We never had to let the Taliban win, but a bipartisan coalition of weakness has humiliated the world's greatest superpower and handed Afghanistan to butchers. In the next few weeks, the situation in Afghanistan will get much worse. Americans need to pray for that troubled country. President Biden needs to man up, come out of hiding, take charge of the mess he created, secure the airfields, and get as many souls out as possible. Time is short. We will see. I know the president is going to give a speech, so we'll see what he has to say, and of course we'll cover that tomorrow. Let's, if we can, maybe move from military, although if you would like to make a comment about whether or not we should deploy troops, whether we should have been in Afghanistan in the first place once we won, what we should have done after that particular point in time, and the rest, that is certainly one issue. But the other issue is to really understand who is now in control in Afghanistan. And there are two booklets that we have made available in the past to help you understand that. One is this booklet that was one of the very first booklets we wrote years ago called Sharia Law. It is written in part to understand how Sharia law operates in other countries, and then also to point out, interestingly enough, how sometimes Sharia law has even found its way, sometimes even in the United States. But most of it has to do with what is it like to live in a Muslim country where you have a very radical set of imams or others that actually implement Sharia law, and it's certainly not positive. The other booklet is, of course, the one on Islam itself. What do Muslims actually believe? Now, to be fair, I spend a fair amount of time talking about how to witness to your Muslim friends in this book, and yet when we talk about the Taliban, these are not the kind of people you would want to have as your next-door neighbors. Where does the word Taliban come from? Well, that's the Pashto, a word for students, and these were individuals who actually were students of a very radical form of Islam, and they actually studied originally in Pakistan, and in some respects they were probably gaining some level of prominence when they actually came under the leadership of Mullah Muhammad Omar. You might even remember back in 1994 where there were some warlords that had captured a number of students. They went in, rescued rescue the girls, hanging the commander from the tank barrel. This is part of what Jim Dennison talks about in his book, since he has written a book on the whole issue of radical Islam. They grew much stronger, and as a result, because of pushing the Soviets out of Afghanistan, pretty much then dominated Afghanistan for that period of time. There was this, if you will, political vacuum, and the Taliban came in and filled that vacuum. Well, they also tended to want to enforce a very radical form of Islam called Wahhabism. Just as we've had a Protestant Reformation, you also have in Islam back in about the 18th and 19th century, mostly the 18th century, a sort of Muslim Reformation, which was led by Wahhab himself, who actually advocated a very literal interpretation of the Quran. I'll have more to say about that in just a minute. But because of this, these individuals actually began to limit what could actually be done in Afghanistan. And because Omar himself was at least sympathetic to Osama bin Laden, allowed Osama bin Laden to establish a base for Al-Qaeda, which was sort of almost like a franchise operation. After 9/11, the decision which was made at the time to not expel bin Laden led then to the U.S. bringing a coalition of individuals into Afghanistan to remove the Taliban from power. As we now well know, we did not know that at the time. Osama bin Laden escaped over into Pakistan and lived there until eventually he was killed by forces many years later. Over the last 2 decades, if you want to count the death toll, 2,300 U.S. military personnel were killed in Afghanistan, more than 20,000 wounded. And before we end the program today, I do want to read from a very good piece by Gary Bauer, in which he certainly wants to salute those of you that have served in Afghanistan, and even those who lost their life there as well. But now, of course, what we have is the Taliban having seized the capital city of Kabul. They're planning a ceremony at the presidential palace in which they want to rename Afghanistan as the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, and are promising, if anything, a time of peace and normalcy. But I doubt that that's going to happen. And the reason for that is to look at how the Taliban ruled in the past. So let's go through that real quickly. They banned television. They banned music. They banned movies. There were people that were actually prosecuted for actually flying kites. They disapproved of girls over the age of 10 going to school. Women had to wear burqas. And there was more examples of human rights and cultural abuses than you can possibly imagine. Not, of course, to minimize that alone, but also just the incredible destruction of all sorts of artifacts and others that came there as well. So when we come back from the break, I'll talk a little bit more about their particular theology. And then just before we wind it down, talk about how, if nothing else, we do need to salute those individuals who did serve there, if for no other reason than the fact that for the last 20 years, we have not had an attack like we had on 9/11. And you wonder what might happen in the future if this becomes a haven for terrorist activity. In the last half hour, if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some phone calls right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, at Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kirby Anderson.
Back for a final hour. If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Final half hour. And again, let me just mention as a program note that some of you that have been watching The Chosen, a while back we had a chance to talk with Dallas Jenkins, and I thought we'd play part of that interview tomorrow along with some other interviews. Of course, we'll continue to cover this story about Afghanistan for quite some time, but I think the piece by Ben Sass, as well as a couple of articles by Andrew Mikta and David French, give you a little bit of a perspective on that as well. And let's, if we can, just before we get back into this idea of the Taliban, take at least one of the phone calls. So we'll go to Marcella in Georgia, wanting to ask a question. So Marcella, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Good afternoon, sir. I had a question for you. There's comments about making the women do things and taking things away and all of that. And I'm like, what did we do to them as a woman? Maybe as an American, I may be out of place asking this question, but I'd just like to know.
I think it's a good question.
What do they have against us?
And again, it has to do with a literal interpretation of the Quran. Now, again, I tend to quote Bible verses on this program, but can you for a minute let me quote from the Quran? And I will help you understand that if you read various parts of the Muslim holy book, the Quran, you will come to a conclusion that women do not deserve any kind of positive treatment. For example, this is direct quote from Surah 4, verse 32. And Surah 4, surahs are chapters just like chapters in the Bible, okay? Surah 4 says, men have authority over women because God has made the one superior to the other. So first of all, women in the Quran, according to Muhammad, are considered to be inferior. Okay, that shows up in this issue of Sharia law. I'm holding up my Sharia law booklet at the moment, which you can read for yourself. So, or you can go get a Quran and read it, or you can read what I have here. The Quran also, because of that, says that a woman does not have an equal standing before the law. A testimony, according to Surah chapter 2, verses 282, actually would only be worth half of a testimony of a man. That is emphasized not only in terms of a court, but also in terms of inheritance. You can go back to Surah chapter 4, 11, and here the Quran teaches that a son's inheritance should be twice that of a daughter's. Here's the direct quote. Allah thus directs you as regards your children's inheritance to a male a portion equal to that of two females. So you can begin to see that when you look at this, this is one of the challenges that I've said before of trying to create a democracy, or much less a republic like we have, but even a democracy in a country that has a Muslim foundation, because you don't have what we call equal protection under the law. A man is worth more than a woman in terms of rights before the government. A woman has less rights in a court of law. A woman has less inheritance rights. And lest you think that it's only against women, because Marcel asked a good question, why are women treated differently? Well, there's a difference also between Muslims and non-Muslims. Muslims have a greater standing as well. If that's not enough, Jews and Christians under Sharia law in the past oftentimes either were killed, and you have this in some of the Surah 9:5, probably the best example, the so-called Surah of the Sword, or Surah 9:29, fight those who believe not in Allah nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by Allah and his prophet, nor acknowledge the religion of the truth, even if they are people of the book. Who are the people of the book? Well, that'd be Jews and Christians, because they have the book called the Bible. Even if they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. And so the idea is that even if you were a Jew and a Christian, you could live, well, lots of times they would be killed, but in some countries where you have Sharia law, they could live, but they had to pay a special tax, a jizya. And so that is, again, one of those issues that is illustrated. Now, of course, you might say, well, what do they have against women? Well, they actually believe that women are almost like property, because in the Quran, women can actually be part of a harem. In other words, you are allowed, according to the original edicts that came from Muhammad, you are allowed to have polygamy, usually 4 wives. Which brings me to something else that has now developed under the Taliban, because if you've been paying attention to what the Taliban has been doing, first of all, they were going door to door in one province looking for people that had worked for the government. They killed at least 27 individuals that we are aware of, 10 others looted the homes, but also they went and ordered religious leaders to provide a list of girls over the age of 15, also widows under the age of 45, so that they would engage in a, quote, marriage with Taliban fighters, because it is allowed to actually have a brief marriage with those. It's almost like sanctioned prostitution. So anyway, back to her question, what do we do against them? Nothing. It's just that women are valued much less than men. And again, this is an illustration of why many people have said that when you talk about Islam, it's really kind of a 7th century religion. You wouldn't really refer to Christianity as a 1st century religion. Sure, it came from the 1st century under Jesus, but it has certainly over time made its peace with the modern world. And yet you can see that when there is this attempt to try to bring you back to the founding of Islam, what was the role of men in the 7th century Arab world? Well, that's the role of men today in a country governed by Sharia law. What was the role of women in the 7th century and 8th century in the Arab Peninsula? That's kind of the role of women today that you find yourself in many of these countries. Let me, just before we take a break, also try to add a little more to the conversation. And that is to recognize, and this comes from our good friend Jim Dennison, that the Taliban follow a particular kind of theology. I talked about Wahhabism, but there's also what's called Deobandi theology. Why is it called that? Well, Deoband in India is where this came from, and this is a more strict view of Islam, where it rejects all sorts of traditions and studies that are not directly related to the study of the Quran. So it rejects any kind of reinterpretation of Islamic precepts and Islamic theology to accommodate the modern world. So this is a desire to go all the way back to the, if you will, original founding of Islam under what is called the Sunnah of the practices of the Prophet Muhammad. And so they then believe that religious edicts that come from their leaders have a divine source and are more authoritative than this idea of trying to treat people with equality. So you get this very extreme form of what we talk about in terms of Sharia law that is actually implemented and preventing you from having anything that would look like a democracy, because you don't have this idea of men and women being treated equally, of Muslims and non-Muslims being treated equally, of Muslims, Jews, and Christians being treated equally as well. And so as we come to the next break, let me just simply say, as Christians, we can reject that for a variety of various reasons, not the least of which is the verse that we used last week when we were talking about critical race theory in Galatians 3:28, the idea that there is neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female, slave or bondservant or free man, that we are all under Christ Jesus. And so there are, I think, some really good reasons from a biblical point of view to reject this idea of Sharia law. But even in this country, some people have tried to actually implement Sharia law, and that's why I've simply said that there is a very simple way to reject that, and that is the numbers 1, 8, and 14. One, which is the First Amendment, which says we should not have an establishment of religion, and Islam wants to establish itself as the major religion. The Eighth Amendment about cruel and unusual punishment. If you've seen the punishments under Sharia law, they would fit under the category of cruel and unusual. And then the 14th Amendment, which provides equal protection, but Sharia law does not provide that. So we have a good reason from a biblical point of view and from a constitutional point of view to reject Sharia law. But we're going to see this unfolding in Afghanistan under the Taliban. And we'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, let me just real quickly say just a few things to those of you that have served with distinction in Iraq or Afghanistan. Gary Bauer does a good job of it, so I will just read the part that he says. And, of course, he spends a fair amount of time talking about a number of other topics, but he points out the fact that he says, really, I can't even imagine, nor can I, the emotions that millions of veterans, active duty military, their families and families of the fallen are feeling today. So he says, my message is for them. The fiasco is not on your backs. You are the patriots who answered the call to our country. You're in the same tradition as the men who fought on Concord Bridge, on the beaches of Normandy, at Pork Chop Hill in Korea, and Khe Sanh in Vietnam. He says, to the Gold Star, mothers and fathers, your sons and daughters did not die in vain. Their sacrifice protected this country for 20 years from another 9/11 attack. Now that Taliban has taken over, if it becomes another terrorist enclave, I wonder. But at least let's say that they have protected us for these 20 years. To the wounded warriors, he says, who left an arm or a leg on the battlefields of Afghanistan and Iraq, we know your sacrifice. A grateful nation loves you. You are better than the people who led you into wars. They would not let you win. To those who returned home mentally wounded and are overcome with despair, I beg you, do not give in to it. We need you now more than ever. And to every American, reach out to a veteran or military family today. Tell them that nothing can ever cancel the heroism that their sons, daughters, and they have displayed. And they pray that we can still rescue our country, this shining city on a hill, before it's too late. He reminds us of a number of other things. Some of the random observations here just are something to mention. The Taliban spokesman is still on Twitter, while former President Donald Trump is banned. That should tell you a lot right there. He goes through some of the history of George W. Bush getting us into Afghanistan, why we were there, what we could accomplish, what we could not. Reminds us that the former Defense Secretary Robert Gates, who served in the Obama administration, wrote in his memoir that Senator Joe Biden, quote, has been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades. And Gary Bauer couldn't resist to say, well, President Biden has kept his streak alive. But he goes through a lot more, but I just wanted to end at least that part by acknowledging that there is, I'm sure today, on the part of many of you that have served in the military, have lost loved ones who served there, of futility. And I want you to know and appreciate the sacrifice that was made. And I also want you to look at some of these articles that we have posted here today. I think David French does a very good job as somebody who did serve in the military in that regard, when never again becomes again and again, because it does seem to us that this looked a lot like 1975 in Saigon, Vietnam. But also to recognize that if we go into a country and we don't have a clear strategy, I think this piece by Andrew Mikta, who is, of course, a military strategist, was another piece that I wanted you to read as well. And, of course, we have now posted this piece by Senator Ben Sasse, which I think was one of the best and most balanced pieces I could find there as well. But before we end, I did want to at least acknowledge there are some other things going on. And so one of those articles that we have posted is about this climate change report. And it is written by Dr. Stephen Koonin. Well, you might say, who is he? He is an individual that actually served in the Obama administration. He is now a professor at New York University, but he's the author of the book called Unsettled: What Climate Science Tells Us, What It Doesn't, and Why It Matters. And one of these days, maybe when Steve finds an open hour that maybe needs some material, I might do a teaching on this issue again of climate change based upon his book. I'm not sure I'll have him on because he is not necessarily always agreeing with us philosophically, politically, and theologically. But he felt the need to write the book because even though he served in the Obama administration, he, I think, as well as anybody, understands that so much of the hyperbole around the climate change reports and the reporting of climate change is based upon climate models which are flawed at their core. But don't take my word for it. We've posted his article, which is about 4 pages long. It is a very good commentary, appeared in the Wall Street Journal. And again, as I read through just some of the highlights, let me just remind you, this is a person that served in the Obama administration, not the Trump administration. This is a person that actually probably believes that there are some things we can and should do in terms of addressing the climate. But at the same time, he makes the same kind of case that many of us around the table have made, that some of these statements are entirely too extreme. He points out that, first of all, this report, and it comes from the IPCC. What's the IPCC? It's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The report is 4,000 pages. No, I haven't read it. There is an executive summary about 41 pages. I've looked at parts. Okay. But there's a man that looked at all of it and lived to tell about it. And he says, again, this is written by several hundred government-nominated scientists over the past 4 years. So again, he's not challenging the academic credentials of the scientists. They have credentials equal to, maybe even superior to his. But he points out that what happens very quickly is the report is not read by policymakers. They read the conclusions. And Dr. Stephen Koonin points out that these reports misrepresent the conclusions that actually are in the summary from the actual articles. And he uses some good examples that you can read if you'd like to. He also points out that most of the predictions for the future have to do with what he calls model muddle. And that is, lots of times you'll hear this phrase, the models say. But he points out that these complicated computer models that are used to produce and even project future temperature, rainfall, and the rest are quite deficient for lots of good reasons. And in some respects, you can see why they're deficient, because the models cannot reproduce the climate of the past. For example, it points out the models fail to explain why you had rapid global warming from 1910 to 1940, when human influence was less significant. And of course, now you see sometimes of something that looks more like cooling. And he says, as is customary, what you oftentimes do is you find that the report obscures or fails to mention various precedents that weaken the case that human activity is really making a difference. And so he concludes by simply saying this: good science is characterized by detail, data, proven models, and reasoned debate. That takes time. Meanwhile, we should be wary, he says, of the torrent of hyperbole that is sweeping the globe. So again, I have a copy of his book. I thought maybe I would take us through one time his book, even without him, although I suppose we could get him on. He is, a physicist, and sometimes trying to get them to communicate at our level, a little more difficult. But I think I can take that very well-written book and bring it down to a level we can all understand, and understand why an individual that was in the Obama administration finally decided to write a book challenging that, knowing full well that he would have all sorts of people promoting climate change come down on his head. And maybe that's reason enough to get him in here. Just simply say, we appreciate somebody being willing to be honest with the facts and not engage in the hyperbole that seems to surround this whole issue of climate change. Anyway, that article is posted, as well as many other articles on Afghanistan. So tomorrow we'll spend some time hearing the interview that I did with Dallas Jenkins, The Chosen. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.